In July of 1916, a combination of a deadly heat wave and the ongoing polio epidemic drove thousands of locals and tourists alike to beaches along the coast of New Jersey. Over the span of 12 days, 5 shark attacks would change our view of sharks forever and make us think twice about getting back in the water. What is up, YouTube? My name is Trinity, and welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before, and welcome to my Shark Week 2026 video. But before jumping into this shark-infested video, I do want to give a shout out to SamiAm_3. Last video, I left several links in the description for different organizations that you guys could donate to help the Indigenous communities that are being affected by the ongoing wildfires in Canada, and he donated $103 to True North Aid, which is the same organization that I donated to. And it warms my heart so much to know that this little channel that we've been growing for years and years, that I started as a teenager, could result in so much good. I hope that more of you choose to donate. If you do, I will make sure to shout you out in future videos. And in the future, as we grow, I can hopefully do more good, because I want this to be a force for good as well as a place for everybody and a place just to relax and forget about the scary stuff going on in the world, so you could just get scared here with some fun stuff. But diving right back into this video, no pun intended, we are going to talk about the first attack. The first attack happened on July 1st at Beach Haven Beach. The victim was 23-year-old Charles Epting Vincent, who was visiting from Philadelphia with his family, and they were staying at the Ingleside Hotel. He and his dog were taking a swim on the beach before going to dinner with his family. Not long after entering the water, however, Charles began to shout, and bystanders at first thought that he was just yelling for his dog. In reality, though, he was screaming because a shark had latched itself onto his left thigh. He was helped by 2 people, a lifeguard named Alexander Ott and a bystander named Sheridan Taylor, who brought him to the beach. And they claimed that as they were pulling him onto the shore, that the shark was pursuing them. And as they brought him out of the water, witnesses said that his left thigh was completely stripped of flesh. He was taken back to the hotel, where he was placed on the hotel manager's desk, but he bled out before help could arrive, passing away at 6:45 p.m. Now, it was very likely from the location of the bite and how quickly that he bled out that his femoral artery was probably severed in the attack, which can cause a person to bleed out between 2 to 5 minutes. And despite this attack, local beaches remained open, probably because back then, as they are now, shark attacks are exceedingly rare, so they probably thought it was a one-off incident. However, sea captains began to report sightings of very large sharks as they entered ports in Newark and New York City. Witnesses also who saw the shark that was involved in the attack said that it was about 9 feet long. However, because it's open water and there's not a lot to compare it to get an accurate description of the size, we don't know for sure. The second attack happened 5 days later on Thursday, July 6th, in Spring Lake, New Jersey, about 45 miles north of the previous attack. Charles Bruder, who was the victim of the second attack, was a Swiss bell captain at the Essex and Sussex Hotel. He was about 130 yards from shore when a shark bit into his abdomen and ultimately severed both of his legs. Chris Anderson and George White, the 2 lifeguards on duty, were notified by a woman that she thought that a boat with a red hull had capsized out in the water. And when they rowed out to see this boat, they realized that what the witness had truly seen was his body covered in blood, surrounded by red water. They pulled his body from the water, but he bled to death before even making it back to the beach. And apparently the scene was so gruesome that several women on the beach fainted upon seeing it. Now, before I get into the last 3 attacks that happened on July 12th in Matawan Creek, I just want to take a moment to point out how tense things must have been in the days between July 6th and July 12th, because now people had heard about 2 shark attacks. The shark was apparently headed north, if it was all the same shark, which I will get into later. And all I can imagine is how tense it must have been in those days. Even if people were still at the beach, were they looking in the water for shark fins, thinking that the killer shark that had already taken 2 lives was swimming by as they just sat there? Were they doing math in their heads to kind of assure themselves that the shark would have passed by now if it was still heading north up the coast? Now, unlike the last 2 attacks, the last 3 attacks all happened on the same day within about an hour. But that wasn't the only significant thing about these last three attacks. Unlike the first two that happened in open water off of a beach, these ones occurred in a creek, so either fresh or brackish water. This creek was called Matawan Creek, and it was near the town of Keyport, which was about 30 miles north of the previous town. Now, before all of these attacks happened, a sea captain named Thomas Cottrell reported seeing an 8-foot-long shark swimming in the creek. But because it wasn't your average place to see a shark, a lot of people didn't believe him, and if they had, it probably would have changed the events of the day. Now, around 2 p.m. that day, a group of young boys were playing in the creek with one of their dogs near Wyckoff Dock. Now, as they were playing, the boys said that they saw what they thought was like an old weathered board of some kind or a log. But as it began getting closer to them, they realized that it was the dorsal fin of a shark. Upon this realization, all of them went to scramble out of the water, but unfortunately, 11-year-old Lester Stillwell was grabbed and dragged back into the water. His friends all ran to get help for him, and they returned with several adult men, and they told the men that there was a shark that had gotten him, but the men did not believe the children, and they believed that maybe Lester had suffered a seizure. They all jumped into the water hoping to find him before he drowned of this supposed seizure. Now, among the men that jumped in to try to help Lester was 24-year-old Watson Stanley Fisher. Fisher actually found the body of Lester, who by this time had passed away of his injuries. But as he was trying to climb out of the creek, the shark that was there in waiting latched onto his right thigh. During this struggle, the body of Lester was lost, though it was found 2 days later about 150 feet up the creek, and Watson eventually lost his life due to these injuries, I assume from blood loss. And while all of the attacks that I have talked about so far are very grisly and gruesome, in my opinion, this would probably be the most horrific just for the fact that there were children and just other townspeople who were there to help a child that they thought maybe had had some sort of medical emergency in the water, and they watched this happen. Now, again, that's not to detract from any of the other traumatic stuff that other people saw, but I think just because there was such an audience and we know there were children there makes this one especially gruesome. Now, the final victim of this string of attacks was 14-year-old Joseph Dunn, who was visiting from New York City with his family. He was attacked only half a mile from Wyckoff Dock and only 30 minutes after the previous attacks. The shark had literally grabbed him by the leg and had swallowed his leg, but luckily his brother and a friend were there and essentially played tug of war with this shark and eventually won. Joseph was rushed to St. Peter's University Hospital in New Brunswick, and he was the only victim of these attacks to survive. He was in the hospital recovering until September 15th. So he was in this hospital for about 2 whole months before he was able to leave. Now, in the days following these final attacks, hundreds of fishermen went out on the hunt for what they had dubbed the New Jersey Maneater, and all of them claimed to catch it. One captain had caught a 14-foot blue shark around Fort Branch. The same captain also said that he saw a large sandbar shark at the mouth of Matawan Creek before all of the attacks, so he thought that could have also been the culprit. However, the person that is most likely to have caught the New Jersey Maneater, or at least the shark that was responsible for the last 3 attacks, was a taxidermist and lion tamer in the P.T. Barnum Circus named Michael Schleicher. He caught a juvenile great white shark swimming not far from the mouth of Matawan Creek. Its weight was about 325 pounds, and it was about 7.5 feet in length. And when he cut it open, he said that a lot of meaty, fleshy substance fell out along with a lot of bones. He said it was enough that the stuff filled up about 2/3 of a milk crate and weighed about 15 pounds. And apparently, researchers did test these remains from the stomach of the shark and did determine that they were human remains. He apparently mounted the shark and displayed it, however, it was lost at some point. I definitely think, if this whole story is true, that juvenile was definitely the culprit, at least of the last 3 attacks. Upon first reading about the attacks, I immediately went to bull shark, because bull sharks are known to have very aggressive tendencies. They are full of testosterone, so they are more likely to attack. They usually don't do one and done exploratory bites like a lot of other shark species do, and they are able to move between fresh and salt water. So when I heard it was in a creek, that made the most sense. And they are more common to that area than great white sharks are. However, I can very well believe that the juvenile great white shark was the one responsible. One, because a juvenile may fare better in fresh water than an adult great white shark might, and also a creek is a lot less competition for a smaller shark than it would be in open water with larger sharks. And two of the three attacks that happened that day were on children, unlike all of the other attacks, making me think that maybe being a smaller shark, it could have thought that the children were easier prey, and it bit Watson more out of fear or seemingly self defense than actually trying to eat him. I definitely think the last three were all the same juvenile great white. However, I'm not convinced that the first two attacks were that great white. And I'm not even sure I believe that it was the same shark, just because, again, shark attacks are very rare. This string of attacks is already very abnormal, but combined with it being a heat wave, so more people being at the beach, more activity, I could believe that more attacks happened. I really don't know what to make of the second attack with how gruesome it was, with bites to the abdomen and the severing of both of the legs. That one I really can't wrap my head around, because the thigh bite of the first one could definitely just be an exploratory bite. That doesn't mean it's not deadly, but the shark isn't necessarily meaning to kill the thing that it's investigating. I know shark attacks weren't very common back then, and they're still not common today, but I guess nobody thought to like compare the dentition marks on the bodies to determine the species of shark. It's just an interesting thought that I had. Like, couldn't that have solved at least what kind of shark it was? But again, at this time, sharks were actually not considered to be dangerous creatures, or at least as dangerous. They were seen as very peaceful back then. These are the attacks that changed the public consciousness of shark behavior. And then years and years later, when Jaws was written, that made it even worse. And then years and years later after that, the movie came out, which put an actual image in front of people as to how horrific a shark attack could be, no matter how hokey and fake the stuff looks now. That probably put people's fears into overdrive now that they were able to see something that normally doesn't happen. Now that we're through the scary stuff, I do want to remind you guys, even though I trust that you guys are all smart, especially if you are interested in Shark Week, you guys know sharks are not these mindless killing machines. They're an animal like any other. That does not mean they're not dangerous. They are dangerous like any wild animal has the potential to be. So if you are going into their homes, you should make sure not to go swimming at dusk or dawn when they're most active, and you should just be aware of your surroundings. Now, I won't fault anyone for being a little scared of sharks. It's healthy to have fears of things that are dangerous. However, when people get to the point that they think all sharks should be killed or that they bring no inherent value to the ocean ecosystem, that's where I have to draw a line, because they are essential to ocean ecosystems. They keep things in balance. And I always find it ironic that the people that are most likely to be attacked by sharks are people that already most likely have a deep respect or understanding for the ocean, because they're choosing to put themselves out there and they know the risks. Whereas the people that want all sharks killed are the ones that can only enjoy beaches from their resorts. Peter Benchley, the author of the original Jaws novel, found great success after writing his book. But later in life, he deeply regretted it because he had given sharks such a horrible reputation. Not intentionally, mind you, but that was the cost of his success, and millions of sharks suffered because of it. He dedicated his later years to talking about shark ecology and behavior and advocating for their protection, and essentially trying to rehabilitate the negative image that he had given them. Steven Spielberg also expressed regret in making the movie, because that took everything that Benchley had done and put it on steroids, unfortunately. But that is my Shark Week 2026 video for you guys. So be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and click that notification button so you'll be notified anytime I upload. Like I did last video, I'm going to put links for all of the organizations you can donate to if you want to contribute to the Indigenous communities being negatively impacted by the wildfires going on across Canada. And if you want, you can go on Threads or find another way to contact me. I'm also on Instagram, and send me proof that you donated, and I will give you a shout out in the next video. I love you guys all so much, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.